to writing effective melodramas or adventure stories, how to write fun. Depends on which culture you're from. No, so we're going to go ahead and get things started off. If we want to have the panelists introduce themselves, we'll start right here.
I'm Tony Daniel, and I've just been talking at the Bain Road Show for 2 hours, and so there may be a rasp in my voice. I am an author. I've written a bunch of stories back in the 90s. I was a Hugo finalist, won the Asimov's Reader's Choice Award back then. Then sort of got into editing, and now I'm a senior editor at Bain Books. Also written a couple of movies for the Chiller Channel and Sci-Fi, and a couple Star Trek novelizations, and a bunch of science fiction. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Allison K. Hymas. I write middle grade. I have 2 books out. The first one's called Under Lock and Key. The second one's Arts and Thefts. They are about a 12-year-old boy who's a thief for hire at his middle school and has to team up with his nemesis, a 12-year-old girl detective who likes to throw him in order to save the school and solve mysteries and stop criminals.
And they are really awesome. They are really good. I just read them recently with one of my grandchildren. So anyhow, I am Scott Savage, and I write middle grade. I wrote the Forward series, the Case File 13 series, and the Mysteries of Cove series. And then we just announced a new series that'll be coming out in 2020 called The Wonderland Diaries. So.
I'm Jessica Day George. I'm a best-selling author of 15 books. All of them are fantasy. Many of them are middle grade. The others are young adult. And so I enjoy writing stirring tales for young readers. The title of this channel is making me laugh really hard. So ripping yarn.
We like the description where it's like, you don't always have to write amazing fiction. Sometimes you can just write adventures.
I'm going to be Jared Quan, your moderator for today. I'm the 2-time president of the League of Utah Writers. I also serve on the Storymakers Board. I'm also on the Arts Councils for West Jordan, South Jordan, and Eagle Mountain. And I also drive Lyft as one of my 4 jobs. So after the conference, maybe I'll get one of you. So let's get things started off. Let's start with our first question, which is how do you use tropes and cliches as a genre to your advantages?
Well, tropes and cliches. Well, I like to think more of it as using archetypes, things that are endemic and ingrained in the human soul that we use. That's what the cliche is. If it's when you tear away all the overlying infrastructure and get down to what's really funny, it's really like tickling those archetypes, I think. And I think that science fiction and fantasy is really good at it because we sort of access the subconscious directly with our stories instead of having to pretend like we're being realistic. We access a portion of the human imagination that other writers have to worm their way into, and we can get at it directly, and we can sometimes be funnier, I think, and have more fun than the other genres. I don't know if that's the coherent thought, right?
And I jump onto that as well. I think what's really fun with it is to take something that they are expecting, that they know, oh, here's one of those girl tied to the train tracks, speaking of melodramas type of stories, and then to flip it, turn it on its head. So they wake up because they think that they're getting one thing and then it's flipped around. And my first published book, Dragon Slippers, came from the idea. I thought it would be so hilarious. Can you imagine if your family tried to sacrifice you to a dragon? You're like Andromeda chained to the rock in Clash of the Titans. And out comes this dragon and looks around and goes, oh no, I'm too old for this. And is not interested in eating you or fighting a knight over you. And then the local knight shows up and is like, oh, you? You seem nice, but I'm just like, I don't really like freckles and stuff, so I think I'm just gonna go now. So the knight has refused to fight for you, the dragon is too old to gum you to death, so, what's a sacrificed virgin to do? Open a shop, make dresses. So it's really fun to take those things that people are expecting. The little green men land, and then what happens? If you've ever seen the show Shaun the Sheep, by the Aardman Animation, those Shaun the Sheep episodes, there are several where aliens land. There's one where some aliens run out of gas and land on their farm and look around with their scanner to try and find fuel for their ship because they're out of gas. And what does their ship run on? Sheep poop. So the sheep run around with the wheelbarrow and the shovel, and they scoop up all their poop, and they put it in the little spaceship, and the alien takes selfies with them and then flies away.
Yeah, so I think you can, like you were saying, you can take something that's expected and use that as a part of your story, or you can flip it, or I think especially in fantasy and science fiction, you can take the cliche, recognize the cliche in story, and then have fun with the cliche. Where like in my Nefarious book that I just finished recently, it's a kid who knows all the fantasy cliches. He knows that if you get into a fantasy world, you're the chosen one, but then discovers that he is actually the arch villain. So you're actually taking, the cliche and expecting that. So.
One thing that I do with mine is I take the cliches of a genre that does not belong with middle grade and I put it in the middle grade book. So mine it's a mystery, and I draw from noir a lot in the style of my writing and some of the character archetypes, and so you've got these characters and these archetypes, these stereotypes, these tropes that belong with more gritty, hard-boiled detectives, and I have 12-year-olds who like chocolate cake and get paid in chocolate cake, and my femme fatale is a scary detective girl, and it's good times.
Awesome. Great transition into our next question, which is what techniques do you use to pull readers into the story immediately?
So, for me personally, you have to have a conflict, not the conflict right away, but a conflict. In Zombie Kid, they're making these really cool costumes, and they need to be better than everybody else's costumes. And in Evil Twins, Making the Team, they're, I know, right? Too many. They're making like a horror film, and so I think you want to grab, I call it a Buffy beginning, because Buffy, at the beginning of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's never the conflict, it is a conflict, but you have to pull the reader in with something that's important to the characters.
Who here was at the beginnings panel earlier? Like a fair few of you. I'm going to repeat myself, sorry. I think you have to kind of start off with a bang. You have to start off with the day your character's life changes. I mean, not necessarily the first line of your book needs to be, it was a 3.3 earthquake, which is unusual in Bluffdale at 5:03 a.m. Not necessarily with the earthquake, but with the day of the earthquake, which seemed fairly ordinary, and from saying that a day is ordinary that it will not end in an ordinary fashion. Something like that to kind of just start right into it. But like Jeff was saying, I totally agree, like not necessarily like, Buffy would often start off with her in a graveyard staking a vampire, and you're just like, wow, that was pretty dangerous, but that's not the thing that later on in that episode was going to be the big problem, or, she almost got expelled from school, but that wasn't even the issue when the mayor tried to eat everyone at graduation anyway, So you kind of start off with some sort of event, or, like, speaking of adventure stories, it's always great to start off with some humor, especially in the kids' books. Like I was joking about, like, maybe you don't start in the middle of a battle, but if you start out with two characters being shot with arrows, and then the one turns to the other and goes, is this the 5th time this week or the 6th? I've lost count. Like how many times a week are you shot at with arrows? Like, why? It will pull you in to find out why Rob and Little John are being shot at with arrows, even though they're such adorable woodland creatures, The girls all know what I'm talking about.
What I was thinking of when you guys were talking was the idea of starting with putting some kind of question in the reader's head. So we've got a conflict. how is it going to be resolved, or why are they being shot at with arrows for the 5th or 6th time this week, or what's going on, how is this going to be resolved, or just what on earth is this main character even up to? So.
I think there's many ways to start a book and a story, and you can start it in media, in the middle of it, or you can do it. But one of the key ways I think to really start a good book is to pull the reader into a deep penetration point of view of your main character. Get them into the head of that character, however and that when you got them there, when you start inviting them in somehow, either with a plot point or with some cool description. The sky was the color of a television, turned to a dead channel, is a pretty good opening sentence. The opening sentence of Neuromancer, William Gibson's book. These are ways to get the reader into this new house, this new castle that you're going to then show them, and you're going to have an adventure there. So I think that establishing that deep point of view where they feel comfortable, and you show them the couches where they can sit and watch and start identifying with your character, who you're seeing things with. If you're using that technique, deep penetration point of view. Really good place to look for advice on this is the Orson Scott Card's wonderful book on writing called, what is it called? Character and Viewpoint, yes, which is just brilliant. It really helps me. Scott Card was one of my teachers back in Clarion West, back in the ancient before days, in the late 80s, and there's so much to learn from that, and that book will teach you how to start books.
Perfect. We know that, of course, the openings differ depending on which groups your target audience. What do you think the differ by audience between the middle grade and adult readers for the adventures?
Can you restate the question?
Sorry, I'm sure I muffled that question pretty good. How do adventure stories differ by audience between the middle grade and adult readers?
I could answer that because I have a 15-year-old and a soon-to-be 13-year-old. There's certain things about adulthood that they're just not ready for or interested in yet. And you try to throw that at them, and it's not that you shouldn't be talking about that with children, it's that they just don't give a rat's ass about some of the things that adults care deeply about. I really think that understanding the mind of thinking about who your audience is incredibly important, especially if you want to sell anything. Because you've got to find a way for your inspiration to intersect with what readers want, what readers desire. And when you can find that, and when you know your audience, you have so much better chance of doing that.
So I do a class on difference between middle grade and YA, and we could jump it up to adult as well. But two of the things that, to me, that focus on middle grade are, one is that middle grade adventures tend to be focused on our individual character, their friends, and their family. Okay, the decisions that they make are going to be about protecting them. Even if they're saving the world, there will still be a focus on their best friend or their family or someone who's close to them. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I think separates these two is the number of motives, the complexity of motives, and the level of gray area. So in a middle grade novel, there tends to be fewer motives, fewer specific things they're trying to accomplish, and those tend to be more clear. There's not as much gray area in it. Whereas if you get into YA and adult, it's not clear. I did this class, and this woman came to me and she said, well, I'm writing a YA novel about a girl who's deciding if she's going to have an abortion or not. And I said, okay, great, why should she have the abortion? And she said, no, she shouldn't. And I said, okay, that's fine, but why should she in your story? No, it's all about her deciding not to have an abortion. And I said, okay, so what you're writing is a middle grade novel with YA content, because there is no gray area. It's very clearly black and white. So those are some of the things for me that I try to focus on if I'm writing middle grade.
Fantastic. So I'm very curious. Maybe you could tell us what one of your favorite adventure stories is and why. Or maybe two.
By the way, if you ever want to know if a book is good, you know how you go on to Rotten Tomatoes for movies? If you want to know if a book is good or not, go to Jessica Day George on Goodreads and look at her reviews or get her newsletter. She has read everything and she does the best reviews.
Right.
Don't put this in front of me.
Come on. Give us a start.
Okay, this means I get to talk about my new favorite, right? Okay. And I've said this to so many people. Write this down. This is the book you have to read. Boy. That's the title. That's it. It's Boy. It just came out. It just won the Newbery Honor. It is set in 1350 something, which was called the Holy Year. It's the year after the Black Plague had gone through for the first time, and all the people of Europe who had not died were going on religious pilgrimages to thank God and the Pope that they had not died of the plague. And Boy is this hunchback who is selected to go with this pilgrim to various holy sites. And he doesn't know why until he realizes that the pilgrim is actually stealing these artifacts, like the rib of St. Peter and the toe bone of St. Peter, and they go to all the sites associated with St. Peter, and you must read it. It is a ripping yarn for young lads, ladies, adults, everyone. The person who recommended it to me is sitting back there. Hi, Jen. Yes.
Who's it by?
Who is it by? She has 3 names. One of them, I think, is Catherine. What?
No wonder you love it.
I know. She has 3 names like me.
Doing it right.
Just look for Boy, and it's not the one by Roald Dahl, and it just won a Newbery Honor. It's easy to find.
The Book of Boy.
It is the Book of Boy?
Oh, you've been lying.
I've been lying all week. The Book of Boy.
By Catherine Gilbert Murdoch.
I was right about the 3 names, and one of them is Catherine. The Book of Boy. I've just been calling it Boy because it says Boy in big letters.
Gotta read the small print.
Bad typography. That's
Fun adventure books. I don't know if this one counts, but the Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner is one of my favorites. I love those so much. I think you already know I love books about thieves. I also like the book series. The first one's called The Last Night, and it's by Hilary Bell. And it's about it takes place in a fantasy world where the main characters are a knight errant and his squire. And the time of knight errants has long since passed. So this is kind of a Don Quixote, bromance, adventure, madcap fantasy series, and I love them to death.
So, I mean, this is what we do at Bain, is we publish science fiction adventure tales in general. So there's so many of our writers that I love their work. I was thinking, a local guy, Dave Butler's work is we're putting out the mass market edition of Witchy Witcher. That's a cool adventure series that's set in a weird alternate past of America. Larry Correa's here, and his Monster Hunter series is just straight adventure. And it's wonderful. Myself personally, right now, I'm reading the John D. McDonald Travis McGee books. Some of them I'd read before. These are mysteries from a long time ago. But The Girl in the Plain Brown Wrapper is one of the best books I've read in many, many a moons. I'm really getting into it right now. It's just about a guy who takes on difficult cases and has adventures while he's trying to solve. The mystery doesn't matter that much. Travis's attitude toward life is really what matters, which is stoic and lackadaisical at the same time. It's a wonderful series. The writing is just wonderful. If you like the Reacher books, if you've read the Jack Reacher books, for instance, it's like that. That is you could say that's a watercolor version of the rich oils of the John D. McDonald Travis McGee books.
What's it called?
So, the one that I'm reading right now is The Girl in the Plain Brown Wrapper, but they all have the words. One of them's called The Crimson something or another, and they all have a color in the title, and there's about 15 of them. They're wonderful books. He was a great writer back in the 70s and 60s, 70s, and 80s.
I was scrolling through my Kindle here. It's like, okay, what have I read lately that I liked? My Diary from the Edge of the World by Jodi Lynn Anderson. It's like this weird version of our world that has all these fantasy creatures, but it's combined with normal stuff, like Zeus is on CNN, and a guy gets sent to jail for putting a bunch of Taco Bell food in front of his yard to attract dragons, and then there's just a cool story about a girl who's afraid that her brother is going to die. And then the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman, that's YA, and it is a future where no one dies anymore, and so there are people who are assigned to go and randomly kill people, and a boy and a girl get chosen to do this job, and they don't want to do it. And then there's a trilogy that came out a little while back. It's kind of older middle grade called Insignia by S.J. Kincaid, and it is it's sci-fi, a future where kids have chips implanted in their brain to control ships that fight against each other, and all of those were ones that I just loved. So,
What was the first one called?
the first one was My Diary from the Edge of the World, written in first person middle grade, and the voice is just awesome. It was one of my favorites. I think that came out about 2 years ago. So.
Now, for all those writers who are just barely getting into writing, what kind of advice would you give them if they've chosen adventure kind of as their direction they want to go?
Well, I mean, the advice that you would give any writer, which is find the place where your imagination and what readers like intersects, so that you're not perpetually trying to sell something that it's not going to have an audience. Find that place, because you don't have to give up your you do what you do. You don't have to give up your art to find this. So think in those terms. Think what is the audience I really want to please? That's the best advice I think I can ever. Who are the people that will really get what I'm doing? And if you can find that intersection, you can develop it. You can sell your stuff, and you can have a great deal of fun doing it instead of trying to perpetually write something that you don't really like that much, or writing something that no one's going to buy. So find that nice intersection. That's my best advice.
And I think one of the things that you have to do now, there are so many books in the marketplace now that you really have to kind of look at your story and go, okay, what is that one or two lines that really is going to make my story stick out? So in the case of your books, you've got that really fun, great voice, that it's totally a film noir voice going on there, and it's cool, it's fun, it's dark, it doesn't feel like typical middle grade. And Jessica was saying that, her thing was, I'm going to write a horse story where the horse doesn't die, and just finished reading that. And again, that's like, oh yeah, I do want to read a horse story where the horse doesn't die, and in my case, my new one, The Wonderland Diaries, it was like, what if Wonderland was a real place, and a descendant of Lewis Carroll discovered that Wonderland was real but incredibly dangerous and accidentally opened a doorway to it. So I think one of the things you're looking for is whether you're going to indie publish it or whether you're going to be selling it to an editor or an agent, they still have to find a way to say, this is why this story is going to stand out. So what is the thing that, not how is it like all of these other books, but how is it going to stand out from those other books?
Have fun. If you're, it's obvious, but if you're not having fun with your own story, then nobody's going to have fun. Well, some people might, but the more fun you have with your own story, the more fun it's going to be just for the readers. And I think it's worth remembering that you are the author, you're in charge. And if you love your idea, if you love your story, if you want to write an adventure that you wish you would be able to read, you can. You have the ability to make it as cool or exciting or do all the fun stuff that you want to do. And you can have a good time writing it, and if you have a good time writing it and you think of an audience that would also perhaps have a good time reading it, then you're gonna at least have something there.
I really like that, having fun. I was on a panel with James Dashner one time, and they were asking him about Maze Runner, and they're like, so how did you come up with the idea for Maze Runner? And he's like, well, I just think of the coolest thing that I can imagine, and then I write that, and that goes right in hand, have fun with it. I agree.
I'm impressed you can keep count while we're talking.
Oh, I don't have to count anything.
You have to hear what the color is of a tone.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm up here knitting, for those of you that can't see. I'm knitting myself a sweater, but the color of this yarn is called old library books. So it's a combination of the yellowed of old pages and the old library books, the dust jacket lists with the Dewey Decimal Number written on the side in white, like it's those colors.
And it's twice as big as it was this morning.
Yes, it is. Thank you for noticing. Where did I get this yarn? It is a Lion brand yarn. They're an excellent yarn company, and it is called something odd. The type of yarn is called something like kazoo or something bizarre. I don't know.
Couldn't you totally see like Jessica sneaking into like the off limits section of the library, in her camouflage sweater that looks like
This is how I will get past Madam Pinch to get to the section of the library at Hogwarts.
New adventure story right there.
Awesome. Well, let's go to some questions from the floor. Let's go over here.
So, what elements would you include to make an adventure fun?
I like that it's only fun in quotes, though.
Right.
Check your level of peril. She wants to know if, for those of you at the back, how do you make an adventure fun in quotes? If it's fun, there's enough danger that you're like, oh my gosh, is someone going to get hurt, or are they not going to succeed at this? But not so much that you're like, well, either way they're going to die, let's all hope they save the world before they do. Like, that's not fun for anyone involved, If you're not really natural at telling the jokes or having the quippy dialogue, don't force it. Let the fun come from, maybe the silliness of the situation they're in. Maybe they do have to knit themselves a camouflage cape to sneak into something, and it's just like, knit, grandma, knit, I've got to have this camouflage cape by 5, Like something like that, like some element to it that seems really silly, but you're like, but if we don't get it, the whole town might be eaten by a taco-loving dragon. Like add to it, make it a little silly, but make sure your level of peril does not exceed your ability to make jokes about it.
And totally up whatever you're doing. Like if I read a fantasy book, especially middle grade, and it doesn't have like lots of cool fantasy, then I'm like, oh, why are you writing that? If I'm reading a book about thieves and detectives and stuff like that, then I want all that thief and detective stuff. So, again, whatever you're going to do, if you're writing Harry Potter, give me lots of magic. If you're writing film noir, give me lots of film noir stuff. Don't feel like, well, I'll just do, enough of it. I don't want to overdo it. It's hard to overdo whatever the cool element of your book is.
So how do you deal with creating a plot that at times because you were talking about dealing with peril, making sure that you can still make fun of things, but how do you take something that is going to go for a long time and still make it fun in the middle? Because it's exciting at the peak and at the end, but how do you make those just pretty moments fun?
Jeff saw me. Hi, the microphone is on. Here you go. She was asking how you carry that level of adventure throughout a longer story. Fun at the beginning, fun at the end. What do you do about the middle? Whether it's a series or just one book, they should be encountering things all along the way. So if you have to get the ring to Mordor, along the way there should be struggles, or you may have to find a dwarf, an elf, a man, and some ponies. Stretch those out so you have all the mini adventures within the adventure. Same thing if you're doing a series and you're like, yes, but they will not get to Mordor until the end of book 3. But they still had something happen by the end of book 1. They still had something happen throughout book 2. Battles were fought, people were kidnapped, they took the hobbits to Isengard. All that stuff happened throughout. It didn't happen towards the end of Return of the King. It happened throughout. So sprinkle it throughout. If they've got items they need for a quest, they're going to find those items scattered all throughout it. and hopefully not in an easy to follow pattern that makes it too predictable. Like every odd numbered chapter they find a magic artifact, that's a bit much. But like, or they should encounter something, a monster or something like that, or whatever you're having, or parents that won't let them out to go have the adventure, or, you know, throw a snag into it. They can't get their camouflage cape in time, so they're gonna have to try to go in through the window, you know, things like that. But sprinkle those throughout. You know what your end game is, but the game is being played throughout. You have to move around the board.
And along with that, you have your end game, you have the thing that you need to accomplish at the end, but there could be mini trials, mini games along the way. Like, if you're writing a heist story, over in the end, they need to rob the big diamond, they need to steal the big diamond from the museum, but along the way, they need to perhaps put a team together, and they need to get their
You gotta get the Mormon boys.
You gotta get the Mormon boys, and you gotta get their cat burglar who can do all the acrobatics through the laser grid, and they need to find the getaway driver, and they need to
set up secret identities for some of the
set
people.
up secret identities, and along the way, those are the steps that are going to lead up to them being able to actually accomplish the big thing. But those individual little steps might have snags as well. Maybe they can't get the Mormon boys. And maybe the getaway driver really just does not like the getaway driver that they want is the one that
they have to get a Baptist
can't seem to make a left turn or whatever.
Yes.
The Baptist church.
Baptist can't signal.
So along the way, like these little steps that lead up to the big, to them actually being able to accomplish the big thing at the end, those can be elements of adventure in places where you can have the fun or the conflict as well.
Baptists don't signal because it might lead to dancing. How many of you have heard about the plot, the Scott Meredith plot skeleton? The good old Scott Meredith plot skeleton. Anybody ever heard of the 3-act structure?
Yeah.
Okay. It's the same thing. You ever heard of Aristotle's Poetics? Same thing. Here's, you don't have to follow this, although you're a fool if you don't. But here's how it goes. You got a hero. Your hero has a problem. Your hero attempts to solve that problem, but does not solve it. That is where you set up the middle part of your book. If you have a hero and then the hero tries to solve the problem and the hero solves the problem, that's when you got that squishy middle where you don't know what to do with it. So what you need to do is have your hero fail miserably at solving the problem. And it maybe even almost destroys the hero. The hero has to remake him or herself, reconnect, figure out a better way to come at this problem, maybe reconceive the problem. And that's what you're doing in the middle of the book. And then you got your big finale where the hero either solves the problem, or if it's a tragedy, the problem solves the hero. You'll see so many stories, great literature, silly stories, everything that follows that good old Scott Meredith plot skeleton. Hero has a problem. Hero attempts to solve the problem, messes up. Hero comes back at it, solves the problem, or the problem solves the hero. In either case, the status quo is reestablished, and that's how you fix your medals.
So in fantasy stories, there happens to be a lot of traveling, and traveling is really, really boring, and I don't like writing it. How do you guys get around that?
Do you have to write it?
No.
Are they finding a magic artifact along the way or meeting anyone at Bree?
That's exactly the thing. If something is happening while they're traveling, if that is part of the adventure, then you do it. And if it's not, then you cut it and go, 7 days later, tired, and that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, that's really the case with any part of your story. Never write a chapter that is designed to get you from point A to point B. If that's the only reason for that chapter, cut it. It's got to be something that moves the story forward and accomplishes a very specific thing. And traveling is a great example of something that can, if they're having this adventure
If it turns out they're going to be blown there by the north wind or something, that's cool. Describe them being blown there by the north wind. But if they're walking, no. Like, that's unnecessary. You could just start chapter 5 with geez, we've been walking for 5 days.
Give
And
them
there you
magic boots.
One of my favorite quotes was Neil Gaiman was taken onto the set of Stardust when they were making the movie, and they had spent more than they'd ever spent on a single prop, and it was this huge flying pirate ship, right? And so he met all these people. They'd spent over $1 million to make this prop and everything, and they interviewed him, and they said, well, so how did you feel, when you were out and saw that pirate ship and everything? And he said, I felt horrible. And he goes, all I did, I just needed a way to get my characters out of the clouds. And I'm like, I am so sorry that you So yeah, I mean, in that case, he had a cool thing that he did on the journey.
The best part of the movie, but he just was like, we
just gotta get him out of the clouds. Here's a flying pirate ship, yeah.
How do you make your adventure story more on the darker side?
You were talking about that before. You wanna?
Oh, this is about how much I like dark stories.
Yeah.
That's not a comedy, right?
How to write an adventure that's not a comedy? I still think it's funny that I'm not holding the mic for this because the 2 books I've written are comedies. Personally, I do like really dark stories. I love reading stories. I said this in the previous panel. My favorite genre of middle grade is innocent enough to be marketed toward children, but dark enough to raise eyebrows over the fact that it is marketed toward children. And I think that the way that I think that happens is when you have a character and you know what they fear, you know what they love, you know what they hate, you know what they hope for, you understand their emotional stakes, and then you just push them to the limit. Like, I am working on a YA right now where that is a bit darker than the ones that I'm, these middle grade books. And in this book, I've got a character who is, he's got some issues, and he's got 2 people in his life, just 2 people, who he can fully rely on. And through that book, I removed both of those people from his life. And so he doesn't have that support system anymore. So this, with making a story, an adventure story dark, I think it's finding the things that scare characters, the thresholds that they have to cross, and if they do, they might have to sacrifice something they really care about, or they might lose something that they value, and they'll never get it back. There are these real stakes, this real loss that actually does happen through the story. Even if it has a happy ending, even if everybody wins, I think a good dark story is one that will take the character down to the lowest point that they could possibly go, where they feel like they've lost everything, or they have to face the scariest things they've ever had to face. And even if they come out of it triumphant at the end, it goes to those places.
So how do you keep it like adventure in that sense? Does that make sense? Like Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's not a comedy, but it's still an adventure story. Like, does that make sense? Like, is it the element of wonder?
Yeah, so
I think again that so adventure again is what are we trying to get? What are we trying to accomplish? What stands in our way? If you want to make it a funny adventure, then great. You throw a lot of humor and silly things, and there's great things you can play. If you want to make it a dark adventure, then I think exactly what you were saying, which is, okay, what is the one thing that my character relies on, that they believe to be true, that if they discovered it wasn't true, it would just destroy them, you know? I mean, let's take Rapunzel. That dark moment in Tangled, right? When she discovers that the woman who she has viewed as her mother for her whole life is not only not her mother, but is this terrible, manipulative person. And she goes, fine, now you've made me the bad guy. That is a really dark, cool scene, but it's because we face this real fear inside. And so I think that's one of the things that you do. Now, the adventure can still take place, but it's how you're reacting to it, what's occurring. I mean, it's that moment where our hobbit stands on the mountain and sees everything that stands between them and where they need to take this ring, and you're like, there is no possible way that they're gonna make that, you know, and the weight of the ring, and Sam wanting to help him and take the ring, but he can't, and it's his own personal struggle. That's that kind of dark stuff. To me, obstacles are great, but the most powerful obstacles are not the mountain in front of you, it's not the villain, it's not the monster, it's something that you believe really strongly that is about to be just ripped to pieces.
One thing I would say about darkness is is in every story you must decide if there's going to be a moment when the gingerbread men realize that the house they live in is made from the flesh of their fellow creatures.
He screams for he does not know. Have you seen that comic about the gingerbread man sits in the gingerbread house? Is he made of house or is house made of him? He screams for he does not know.
But that and that is that's how you take things dark is you make the choice to do it, and that doesn't make the adventure go away. It just means that you're finding your hits in a darker cave.
And you still need to have that try-fail cycle where they try something and they fail, but it's going to be a harder fail and it's going to be a harder try. But they still need to have some elements of hope. Well, if we try it this way, we might succeed. Anytime there's a cycle in stories where there's just no hope whatsoever, it's just bleaker and bleaker, people are going to stop reading. That is too much. That is too depressing. Even in horror stories, there's elements of, oh my gosh, they are going to make it, thank heavens, before they all die.
Describing Game of Thrones?
I'm not even gonna go there, but like if you watched the Battlestar Galactica, like the newer series and stuff, there was a whole season where the first half of the season nothing good happened to them when they were on that planet, and everyone was cold and poor and fat and terrible and stuff. And like that whole season, I had so many friends who are writers and who loved that show peel off and stop watching because they could not take it anymore, because not one single thing went their way. Even in the beginning when people were dying and the ships were crashing, then they're like, oh, but we can add up our tally because a baby was just born on the one ship. Yay! But that second season started out with this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this couple's not together, these people are and really shouldn't be. I mean, it just went on, and it was like, you can't make someone watch 8 episodes of something with zero hope unless they have quantitudes of Prozac at their disposal.
Or if you throw a bunch of naked people.
Or if you throw a bunch of naked people. There weren't even enough naked people in that part of the episode. There wasn't even enough of that.
I was thinking about Game of
It didn't get good till the Foxy Boxy episode. Foxy Boxy, remember that?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's go here.
We got, about 4 more minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
How much humor exactly can you add to it before it's just a comedy with no wedding at the end?
What was the question?
How much humor can you add to it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as much as your character can generate from you being inside of your character, from the reader being inside your character, and if your character is a person that has a dark sense of humor, or has a light sense of humor and takes everything lightly, even the bad things happen, it depends on the character is how far you can go with it, and because the humor always has to arise from the viewpoint that you're using, the character. And even if if your viewpoint's omniscient, that's still a character that you're developing. And so if you've got the reader identified with that person, then that's where the humor comes from. The greatest writers do it constantly. They throw in, like Larry Correa's books are funny as hell, but they're scary.
And that's where I think, again, like Jessica was saying, if it's dark, and there's no hope, you're going to get burned out. If it's joke, and there's no offsetting, your readers are going to get burned out. I mean, have you ever watched like a movie where the big car chase scene goes on so long that you're literally like yawning, that you're bored? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you have to offset that. If you're going to have humor, like the really best humor is when things are kind of dark and they're not looking good, and then it's just funny moment comes out, and that just makes everybody, laugh a lot harder, and it relieves the tension a little bit. So I think in any of those, there's got to be a balance. How far can I stretch my reader before they're kind of getting to the edge, and then what can I do to kind of reset things a little bit?
So give a hand to our panelists.